Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If this is your first time listening in, welcome. We're happy to have you join us. The purpose of this podcast is to provide some valuable content for people interested in Lean Six Sigma, continuous improvement discipline, and journey. Our mission is very simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. We are here to share inspiring stories and journeys from individuals who have embarked on a path of continuous improvement. So whether you're just starting out or looking to take your improvement efforts to the next level, this podcast is here to guide, inspire, and empower you. We know that sometimes the path to improvement can be a bit lonely. You might be trying to push an improvement agenda inside of an organization that wants to keep doing things the same old way. So hearing some stories from people who have faced similar challenges is what we want to do here. I am your host, Keith Norris, and today our guest is Kevin Clay. Kevin is the founder of Six Sigma Development Solutions, Inc., a leading provider of Lean Six Sigma certification and training. He's an author and an expert in Lean Six Sigma. Kevin has trained thousands of professionals, guiding them in their journey to become effective leaders and change agents in their industry. His approach blends real-world expertise with practical tools, empowering teams to drive lasting transformation. So welcome, Kevin. Happy to have you here.
Hello. I'm excited to be here. This is my first podcast as a guest.
Very cool.
Yeah, yes.
And Kevin and I have known each other for a number of years. We've had some good conversations and had a little overlap, so this will be fun to just catch up a little bit. So as we start out, I gave you a little introduction, talked a little bit about what you do, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about Six Sigma Development Solutions and your work there, or if you've got any other special projects that you're up to? What are you up to lately?
Well, we're involved with lots of customers, lots of clients all over the world. But we are a company that has grown from being very small, just myself, going out and traveling and training for larger consulting companies, to where we are now, where I manage many different master black belts all over the world. It's been a huge journey. I've seen a lot of processes, a lot of things, a lot of failures, a lot of successes, and I wrote a book called Why They Fail, because I'm engaging customers. Yes, yeah, there you go. I'm engaging customers on a daily basis. I get calls every day, 10 or 15 calls a day from customers, potential customers all over the world. And I really have the same conversations over and over and over again. And so instead of going through my spiel of helping them to understand the right sequence to implementing Lean and Six Sigma, I wrote a book, and that book has helped me to really educate people of what not to do. And I will tell you that about 90% of companies don't do it right. And if you want to really challenge me on that, your readers, they can read my book, and it will really give you some specific examples of things that they see every day in all of their organizations. Most people come back to me and tell me, I love this book because you talk about stories that I'm involved in now. I'm experiencing that. And it really talks about the key to success and how to build a successful implementation. It's not that hard. And that's really where I kind of came upon KPI Fire. I've always been enamored with the fact that KPIs really lead continuous improvement, but very, very few people understand KPIs or even know that you need to know those. And I found that it melded really well with what I believe. And I'm a zealot. I believe things should be done right. And I see so many people out there doing it wrong. And hopefully, podcasts like this will help to educate people.
It's interesting because I think the concepts of continuous improvement and lean are so simple. I mean, it's pretty easy to get the concepts, but it's one of those things like the mastery of it is something that you could spend multiple lifetimes getting.
Yes.
There's so many layers to it. I've heard described as fractal in nature. It's really interesting how there's so much to it, even though the concepts are really simple. One question I do like to ask, I'm curious, how did you get your start? How did you first get introduced to lean or continuous improvement? What was it? And what is it that was your spark, you might say, to getting on this path?
Well, it actually happened in college. I was in a course with a professor that was a former Hell's Angel. So he had long beard. He looked like one of the brothers from the band from Texas, the two brothers. I can't remember what the name is
ZZ
now.
Top or something?
ZZ Top. There you go. Exact. He looked like one of the ZZ Top guys, and he had his jacket on, his bike jacket. He was a multimillionaire. Only taught a couple of times a year, so he had his TA come in most of the time. But when he did come in, he would enamor us. He would tell us stories. He would teach for about 3 minutes, and then he would get off on a story and would just blow us away. And we used to get him to do that because we loved the stories. But he was a consultant, and he one of his clients was, I think, Peterson Family Farms, and he was one of the people that I believe developed the drug or the serum that keeps pigs from being skittish and having heart attacks. Again, I don't know if that was exactly. It's been a long time since he told me the story, but that just blew me away. That he could go out and use data and to be able to find what caused the problem and pinpoint it, and then develop a solution for it. So I loved being a problem solver. I got fired from many jobs because I was not quiet, and I noticed there was a process problem and something that could be done better. And a lot of people don't like that. They want you to stay in your own lane and do your own thing, and not propose change, not propose better processes. So that kind of led me into owning my own business, because I went to many different companies, and I usually worked myself out of a job. That was my goal at every place I went to. I didn't stay for very long because I would automate myself out of a job, or I would get to a point where it's boring. I'd go somewhere else. So I learned and I saw a lot of processes. And then I decided, it's would be better for me to, instead of working with one company, to be able to work with everybody. And so that really kind of led me to starting my company, and it's taken many years to go get from being the guy sent out to training from the larger consulting companies to now, owning my own and having a lot of master black belt partners that I send around the world.
Excellent. Yeah. The book, I've got a copy of it. It's great. Also, I think I'm on your newsletter list. You send out some really interesting and deep content. So for anybody listening, I'd recommend jumping on Kevin's newsletter
Thank you. I appreciate
list.
that.
It's always good content that just kind of makes you think about a problem in a different way. And that's one thing that I find interesting about this discipline is, even though I'm in the software business primarily, and lean is maybe more of something you associate with manufacturing, every industry is touched by these concepts, and business improvement broadly is, of course, something every organization is doing. And so just, at its core, it's a lot of this is like common sense. Of course, you would look to find root causes, but there's a tool set that's in here. So
Mhm.
maybe could you talk a little bit? I mean, the way things operate in a very large company versus maybe a smaller company are quite different. Is there some insights, or like the ways that you work with companies that you could categorize, like different levels, big versus small or medium companies, and how they work with training programs like what you guys do?
So people tend to put Lean and Six Sigma in a bucket, in two buckets, and I hear a lot of time that this concept of Lean, but I think of Lean and Six Sigma like two halves or two parts of the brain. Lean is very tactile. It's easy, quick wins, things we can touch, things we can change and control quickly. Whereas Six Sigma is more of the other side of the brain. It's more logical, right? And I go into places all the time where they compartmentalize those two, and they say, I don't want Six Sigma. I just want lean. All right. And to me, what's really coming into my head is you're afraid of data, and we don't want to analyze data. You can't manage what you can't measure, right? But nobody measures anything. Or if they do measure that, they don't really look at the measurements. They just make experiential judgments. They make gut feel, all that. We tend to compartmentalize things and put lean and Six Sigma and continuous improvement into these different buckets, right? And then we bucketize sizes of companies. But these methodologies don't care about size. They don't care about your discipline. They don't care about anything but the fact that you have a problem, and that problem is due to variation in your process and wasteful steps in your process, right? It doesn't matter if you're running a multi-billion-dollar company or if you're running a local church. The same things happen. They just happen at a different scale, right? So that's what we try to help people to understand that, a lot of companies call us and say, okay, we are a aerospace industry, and you need to have experience in the aerospace industry. Now, while I don't necessarily have to have that, because that's going to bias me. That's going to make me to come in, and I've already been jaded by that industry. I already think I know what the problem is, right? I've got the solution because I've seen it before. But that's going to get in the way of improving a process, because my bias is going to lead me to someplace, right? So when we go into companies, we don't care if you're huge or small. It's all attacked the same way, right? So building the infrastructure, what I get is I get from small companies or large companies, I get a call that says, I want to train some green belts. And I always come back to them and say, we can train your green belts, and they'll do great things. But what kind of infrastructure do you have? What kind of system do you have for those green belts to survive in? And most of them give me, the blank stare. They're like, I don't know what that means. I just want to train green belts to go out and save the world. And we know right then, it's not going to work, and it never does, because most people don't build that. Small companies, large companies, they really just want kind of the quick win. I want to train a green belt. I want that green belt to come back and fix problems for us, and then those problems aren't even really scientifically picked problems. They're just problems that a leader has pointed to, because that's where we see the pain, right? There's no real understanding of, well, where are the metrics of health of our company at now? What are KPIs? How are we performing to those KPIs? What projects have we identified? How have you prioritized those projects to those KPIs? And then commissioning projects that have the largest effect on the KPIs with little resource, right? In most cases, they want to train green belts. They want to take those green belts back and throw those green belts at, solving world hunger. Green belts always fail. And it's usually the fault of the green belt, or they think it is, but it's not. It's a fault of, you built a wall or a window to a house, but you didn't build the wall. So what happens to the window? It falls down, right? Or you build the wall, but if you don't build a foundation, the wall is going to fall. The size of the company doesn't matter. We've worked with small restaurants. We've worked with, Ford, Chevy. We've worked with companies like Avnet, and we engage them the same exact way.
I'm curious, the companies that send people to you, I'm assuming that a lot of companies are paying for the training for the people that come to you and get trained. Do you have people that like pay out of their own pocket as like just like, hey, I want to learn a new skill and this seems like something that I want to do? I'm curious how much of your business is company sponsored versus like individuals who are, looking for some advanced certification or something.
We have, I'd say we would, and this is not from any data, but I'd say we have about 15% of people coming in to get professionally developed, and paying for themselves. Most of the people that come into our classes are public classes, which is open enrollment. We have 52 training centers across the world, most in North America. They come to our website, they find it, somebody from their company wants to send them to come learn to be a green belt and then come back and start making change. So we have quite a few people come in, from companies just for the sake of professional development. So company sends them in and says, hey, this skill would help you. They're not really interested in promoting a continuous improvement environment. And we work a lot with the military, specifically the Army. But we have a lot of people that are transitioning out of the Army that use something called credentialing assistance, to where the Army gives them a certain amount of money, and they then use approved vendors to go and learn this. So lots of different places they come from.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic. I was on with one of the KPI Fire customers just last week, and we were talking about a project and a particular KPI, and I'm probably not restating this perfectly, but they were working on employee retention was the KPI that they were interested in affecting, and they had a hypothesis basically that said if we can get people to use the education credits, but the reimbursements for learning opportunities, if they can get the employees taking advantage of those things that they, for various reasons felt like there was a positive correlation between the employees that took advantage of those opportunities and the employees that stuck around for a long time. So I'm wondering how often, I'm sure that there's lots of companies that offer tuition reimbursement, I think is the term that they used. I would assume that your training qualifies in some of those kind of environments as stuff that people could.
Yeah, we qualify not directly for the GI Bill, but they can get reimbursed for that. So that there's a lot of state grants that the people that come to us have qualified for. We work with a lot of the MEPs at different states to provide some extra capacity for them. Yeah, we try and kind of pick up any rock that we can turn over to find new avenues for people to come to our class.
In a few of these episodes that I've had now and in talking to a lot of people, there's these mistakes that people make with, let's just call it lean. They say we're going to do lean, or we're going to implement lean, or we're going to have a lean initiative. And I think that there's some challenges to that. I know that you talk a lot about the mistakes. Maybe you could elaborate on how you feel leaders should, or executives should be engaged in a company when they're biting down on something like this or trying to increase the culture.
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I find that in most companies, the way they implement continuous improvement, and when I say continuous improvement, I don't mean lean, because I hear that word all the time. Lean, Sigma, theory constraints, all of this works as a really good toolbox that synergizes together. I see people come to get trained that their leaders haven't really understood what they're doing. So I'm playing golf with, a plant manager from another plant. And he talks about how he's got a green belt, that come in, that when he got trained and took on this project and saved money. And so I want to do it, right? So I'd send the guy out, from the floor, one of my supervisors, one of my engineers, one of my financial people. It's funny, we have a lot of financial people because, they deal with the money. And so a leader always says, well, that person's going to cut costs, who best to be in that than a financial person. I have nothing against financial people, but it's a big population that, comes in our class. And so they have these people come into class, come back, and then try to promote change. A lot of times what happens is the leaders in the company, because they don't really understand what problems fit within the criteria of Lean and Six Sigma, these people get tasked with justifying an improvement, with moving things from one place to another, opening up another plant. These are all projects, but they're project management projects. They're not Lean and Six Sigma projects, right? So because our leaders don't really understand what they're doing, this causes defects all the way down the line. It causes the green or black belt or lean practitioner to take on something that's really not within their wheelhouse to take on, right? So
Yeah.
it's of huge importance that our leadership be educated to understand what this methodology is about solving. I can tell you that my metric for the success of an implementation at any company is the engagement of their leaders. All right,
Interesting.
how engaged they are. And when you have leadership, and please don't take this as I'm negative against leadership. I think that we try to implement Lean and Six Sigma at a level that it doesn't need to be started. It has to be started at the top, right? Our leaders have to understand what are KPIs. What are we trying to affect? What are KPIs all the way down to the human level? Site departments. What usually happens is we send a green belt to go get trained, come back, and then they take on projects that are based on agenda. All right. And when I say agenda, these are the things that we physically see going wrong. It's the thing that's happening now. Then we go out and fix it. But that might not be the problem that we need to solve, because we haven't determined the problem scientifically. We haven't determined the problem by saying, what is our KPIs? What are our metrics of success? Where are we performing to those KPIs? Because when you have that, then you understand where the deltas are in your KPIs, and that helps you to understand this is where the projects should be focused so that we get the most return on investment. So, we have to have KPIs, we have to have projects identified, we have to prioritize those projects to the KPIs, and then we find those projects that are the quick wins. This is the other problem that happens with leadership that's not really educated about how to continuously improve a process. We pick the problems that are, I'll give you an example. I was called by a plant manager who is actually a general manager over several plants. And he said, we've got this new line that we brought up in all of the plants. And it's eating our lunch. We have a very low yield. We need you to come in and help us solve it in a 5-day Kaizen event. And I said, that unfortunately is not going to happen. All right. So, we can solve the problem, but we have to get down to a smaller scope. Does that make sense? All right.
Absolutely, yeah. It sounds like you're making a differentiation between, let's just say, pet projects from an executive versus choosing projects based on a KPI. We would call that a metric in KPI Fire world. So you mentioned yield as an example of one of those metrics. That's a great insight.
And it's this is why I resonate, or why I was attracted to KPI Fire, because your business model really follows my way of thinking when it comes to improving the process. So companies that I work with that say, you're right, we need to train from top down. We need to have our executives trained. They need to understand, where are we going? We need to advertise to everybody what we're doing. We need to find those quick win projects. We need to identify projects, have a project hopper out there, start to prioritize those projects, start to have them in a list of things, a list of projects, and then train practitioners to take these projects on at different levels. Black belt is a very high level project. A green belt is less complex. And then your lean practitioners, your yellow belts, they all take on certain levels. But if you just run out and train some people, the other problem that happens, because you don't have leadership that really understands what they're doing, is they train green belts. And this happens all the time that I see in my company. They go back and they become how do I put it? They are the problem solvers, right? So this, Keith, a green belt, a lean practitioner, a black belt, we don't solve problems. That's not our job. Our job is to be the guide on the side and to be the fly on the wall and facilitate change. The process owner, they're the ones that are going to change the process. And so to be a green belt, the green belt, and come back and, like that SNL skit where the guy comes and says, "Move over, I'll solve it," right? The IT guy. You don't want to be that. You don't want to be the green belt that comes back in and says, okay, first of all, I'm going to ask and find projects, right? If you have to find projects, you failed already. So you should come back and have a repository of projects that have been prioritized to work with other green belts in your organization to tackle these projects. But
I
we
know
have
you have
that
a
one
term
green
for
belt.
that. What do you call that place where those projects should hang out until they're ready to be picked up?
It's some kind of a project hopper, right? I'm going to be someplace where those projects sit, and then they're prioritized through some tool. Something that says, okay, these are my priorities, these are my KPIs, these are my strategies, and then how are these going to fit into those strategies, those KPIs? and we find those projects that fit into those KPIs, and then we back off and we say, okay, now which projects can we get the most return on investment with the least amount of effort? And boom, there's your quick wins. I rarely see companies that do that. A continuous improvement effort has failed if you have a green belt, or if you have a leader that tells a green belt, go find a project. You've completely failed. You will not have in the implementation that will survive at all. If you have a green belt that goes back and is told, I want you to solve problems, run for the hills, because it's going to fail. The green belt is not a change agent. The green belt is the guide to lead those. And I'm sorry, I said the word change agents. They are change agents, but they are not the problem solvers. It's the people in the organization, the SMEs, I call them the PhDs of the process. People that have been there and done that, seen that, right?
Yeah. I want to come back to this idea of leadership a minute. You talked about how important it is to have the executives demonstrate support. I'm curious if you could describe some of these behaviors, things that executives and leaders actually do maybe in a ritual or reoccurring patterns to show that support. What does that actually look like?
Well, it first comes in. It's funny. Leaders don't really have to do anything more than they do already. They just have to define our targets, where we are trying to go, and they have to define targets that everybody will resonate to, right? So if you have targets that are at the organizational level, but not at, say, site level, department level. I spent 25 years in training out at companies all over the world, and I would ask the same question to the people on the floor. What's your KPI? What's your target? And most of them will look at me and say, go talk to my supervisor, right? So you think about that answer, and companies trying to reach a goal, but nobody at a certain level knows the goal. They just don't want to get yelled at the end of the day, right? So a leader's about communication, about communicating those KPIs at all levels, so that we all understand what they are, instead of lemmings running around all in different directions because we think we're running towards the goal that we've been given, because we're really not sure what that goal is, right? So we need to all be running in the same direction, and to do that we have to have targets that are communicated. So at a leadership level, they have to communicate that. And they also have to communicate what are the benefits and detriments. So, one of the questions that you gave me was what happens when lean loses its luster, right? If you have good KPIs cascaded through your organization, and if you understand how they're affecting the profitability, the viability of the company, you're going to know why those are there, and you're going to know how you affect them, right? So there is no loss of luster, because we're constantly overseen by numbers that guide us every day, and we're given the power to then guide our process to meet those goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think and this might be a leading question, so in a court of law this might get an objection. But when we think about the rituals that leaders do, I think, okay, a business review, and a business review that's guided by a consistent set of KPIs, a consistent set of metrics, as opposed to like a task list, you might say. Like, if it's a different set of accountabilities every week, like, hey, did you do this? Did you do that? Versus how are we doing on this set of numbers? I believe if you're managing by the metrics, you should have some consistency as part of those business reviews where there's a common set of metrics. Now, of course, there's some metrics that come and go. You might be paying attention to something project related, but there's that's I would say something you could recognize as an executive leader that's managing with KPIs, is some continuity across the metrics from week to week,
Sure.
month to month.
Yeah, and those cascade all the way down to the floor, to departments, cells, lines, right? So
Yeah.
everybody has to understand what they are trying to affect, and they know that if I hit my OEE numbers, then that's going to affect the throughput at my department. It's going to affect, the site. It's going to affect the organization. So we need to know what that line is. That as far as um, kind of some things that leaders do, they have to develop those KPIs, and they have to run the organization by those KPIs. Otherwise, if we don't have that, we all of a sudden start to manage by agenda, right? So leader one doesn't necessarily believe leader two, and we have a project that showed up on our project list. It's gone to the top of the hopper, and it's important. But then the leader says you can't work on that because of this. All of a sudden, you just broken down the whole thing. So when you have these metrics, when you have the hopper, when you have a prioritization, and it's meaningful, then the metrics lead us to what to do next. The leaders don't tell us what to do. Leaders get to do what leaders should be doing, being visionary, right? I see lots of leaders that are really reactionary, and I know those leaders are that I don't want that leading me. And if they run their company by metrics, by data, which is a Six Sigma concept, they very rarely will pick the wrong next step.
Let me, on this topic of impact of green belt training or lean or continuous improvement in general, one of the popular subjects is this idea of cost savings. And this is one that, has extremes on both ends, I would say. So what is your advice on things to do and things not to do as it relates to cost savings versus other operational impacts on projects?
Well, this is what I find, that the want to save money leads to a lack of understanding of a kind of project that can save you money. All right. So I have a lot of people come into my class, and they have been given a mandate to solve a problem or to solve several problems. And about 98% of those problems don't have the criteria to make it through a DMAIC process, the data side of it. All right, you can solve this with lean. You can solve this with qualitative tools. You might solve it, but because you don't solve it with data, you don't really know if you solved it, or at least I don't think so, because you can't justify the solution with a number. You have just kind of an idea. Yeah, it seems like it's better. In our organization, we talk about how we don't care about saving your company a dollar. And a lot of times that's taken a derogatory, but we always supplement that with, we're not here to save money for your company. We're here to teach your people how to solve problems, a methodology, right? So think about a surgeon that's been trained. He's just been trained, or she's just been trained. They don't go out and do complex surgery right off the bat, right? If they do, they're going to probably kill somebody. So they have to they have to kind of step into it and get experience. So we say you want to find the processes that have data that we can analyze through statistical tools like ANOVA, regression, t-test, etc. I'm just kind of a few, but you have to have data. And if you really want to find the solution to a problem, don't find it through qualitative tools like the fishbone, the 5Y. Those are okay tools. But if you get 5 groups into 5 different rooms using root cause analysis without data, you're going to get 5 different results, right? If you start looking at data through a multivariate sheet and start saying, okay, so my Y is the time it takes to process a PO, all right? And there's variation in that, although the time should be the same every time. Well, if I understand where my optimal level is, I can go into statistics and start to understand what best equals that optimal level, right? And every student that comes through my class at first is very scared and somewhat doesn't like the statistical analysis. But every student that comes out of our class, they all go, man, it works. I hated it, but it works. And now I'm a convert. And we stick with them. We say you can't pass to the next stage unless you meet these criteria, and you have to have data to meet those criteria. we are a company that expects a lot of our green belts, a lot of our black belts, a lot of our practitioners, because we know the data's there and the data is going to tell them what the problem is.
I talk to a lot of folks that are, let's say, they're involved in a CI job title, maybe a continuous improvement director or a vice president of continuous improvement, or somebody in operational excellence or a continuous improvement manager. And I've also heard stories where, I talked to someone just a week or so ago who left companies because, new management, and they cut the whole CI, continuous improvement program. And it's, sometimes there's just a lack of belief or a lack of visibility into the results or something. I'm curious along those lines of, are there some things that I would assume that there's on an individual project level, you're going to have some projects that succeed and some projects that fail. And I think a reasonable leader is going to understand that not every project is always going to be a success, but if you can have some level of accountability on that project to say, we started out with a hypothesis, we put some resources in, and here's what happened. Are there some things that you teach in your training that would maybe get at the accountability side of those? Is that something that could be modeled for an organization to create that accountability, to keep that confidence in these type of projects, this type of program?
Yes, and your program actually does that. Right? It allows you to, it's a repository of information for projects. So this is an article that I wrote, and I'm going to put it in the supplement to my book or my next revision. But I see so many companies do what we call one-hit wonders. I work with companies, I'm not going to name their names, but they train a green belt, and the green belt takes on that one project and never does a project again. Right? And that project goes off in the never sphere. So a year later, somebody else takes on that project from another site within that organization, the same exact project. But because there is not a repository of information for us to go to first before we solve a problem, we reinvent the wheel. And I'm with these companies for so long, and my colleagues, my master black belts, are with them for so long that they say, we've already solved this 3 times, right?
It's really
So
sad how often that happens, isn't it? Like so much.
it just baffles me. It baffles me that something as easy as creating a database of past problems, that you can do that on SharePoint or even with a more robust tool like KPI Fire, to go back and say, okay, before I solve a problem, let's go back and make sure it hadn't been solved before. And even more than that, when you have a good dashboard that says, okay, in my charter, I have my problem statement and my goal statement, right? And then I have like a cost support quality of return on investment. So if I get from processing a PO in 58 minutes when our company standard is 22 minutes to meet demand, and I get down to that 22 minutes, there is some monetary benefit from that, right? And that monetary benefit is, as long as I can statistically prove that I have crossed that gap with the 2T test or some kind of hypothesis test, then I can show statistically that I've taken you from a before state to an after state, and that delta equals amount of money, and I know that I've given you that amount of money. So it's a direct financial gain, and
Absolutely.
that should be captured somewhere, and that should be rolling. Whoever leads a continuous improvement endeavor, again, because a lot of people get sent for a 5-day training to be the deployment leader, which to me is nuts.
I'm always curious about the structure of what I'll just call like the CI function inside of an organization, right? Because some companies don't have any continuous improvement titles, or they'll use other things. Some companies will have a PMO, project management office. I'm curious if you have a picture of like maybe, a large company, because it'd probably be different than a small company. Is there a structure that you would say this is a good structure to have, or this is what you would recommend in a large company for
Sure.
having
It all
a program?
kind of stems from common sense. If you think about it, I'll give you our what we think the structure should be. So if you are training people to solve problems, and then that green belt or that lean agent or that yellow belt or whatever goes out and it engages the operators to solve the problem. If the operators aren't trained and they don't know what's going on, they're going to be inherently fearful, right? They're going to freak out. What did I do? Why are you in my operation? Did I do something wrong? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to improve myself out of a job, right? So all these things will go through their head. So if you do not train them to understand what's coming, if you don't you don't excite them, and we use what's called the white belt. It's a very short training, usually about 4 hours to 8 hours. And by the time they walk out of that white belt course, they are excited. They're jazzed. They're like, wow, this really can have an impact. But they always ask my instructors the same exact question. They always ask, what are they going to do next? So listen to that word. What are they going to do next? All right. Because they're immediately going to think this is a flavor of the week. Right. So if you don't have an infrastructure built, if you don't have educated executives that won't let agenda get in the way of improving your process, taking on projects that are the most prioritized from your project hopper and your KPIs, if you don't have that, then nothing's going to happen. So there has to be those educated executives. They have to understand what's going on. And we have to have a project hopper, right? We have to have the right projects. And then we have to have change agents who immediately, after those white belts have been trained, take on those projects. We have what we call momentum projects. So those are a small sample of all the projects, but we know those will have the quick wins. So this is kind of a marketing deal, right? You have to turn people into where they want to do this. And I will tell you, if you do it right, you can it's funny, in a facility that makes tires, I'm not going to say where it was, or after about 9 months of implementing there, I would walk down this huge floor and people will come up to me. There's thousands of people in this company. People will come up to me that I've never seen before. All right. And they're like, you're the Six Sigma guy. And I'm, yeah, sort of. When's your next training? I want to get into the next one. You don't normally hear that.
Yeah.
So when you can turn the tide and make people want to do it rather than, oh no, I'm told to come into class a day before the class starts, you've met a milestone.
Yeah,
and the implementation will work.
That's what I actually really like about this discipline in general. Is I think that there's a bit of a spark inside everybody, but definitely there's a type of person that's drawn to the type of work to make things better and to improve things, and a lot of time help their coworkers and take take an operational, or maybe you might describe as a little more logical approach to it. Every company has some responsibility to create a career path and a roadmap for people, to go from junior levels to senior levels, and kind of coming back to this idea of budgeting and how to justify training for the kind of thing that you do. You said something a minute ago about your ROI isn't, hey, we're going to save you $1 million if you buy this training, but it's more of a facilitation thing. Do you have any rules of thumb that somebody might apply for things like training budgets or things that you've seen some of your customers use to decide how many people they're going to train this year? Or
I'm looking at implementing a CI effort, right? My first thought is, how can I gain the most money the quickest? So that takes some experience. You can't ask that of a brand new practitioner. So if I was, say, to go in a manufacturing company, I will look at how many changeovers do you have, right? So, and what's the impact of your changeovers? You start looking at processes where they have a huge impact, but nobody really seems to know that. That seems to be the cost of doing business, right? So, we look at the changeovers and we say, okay, let's integrate lean learning with the Kaizen event. Let's meld those two together, and let's do this with a SMED event. All right. We can put all of the concepts of lean into a SMED event. We can put the concepts of flow and takt time and pull and Kanban And that's all of that into it. And we can end with the process that's greatly shortened, which every minute that we save puts a definite dollar value back on the bottom line, right? And leave with a benchmark process where we've got it controlled. We have lean boards, we have visual management. Everybody understands how that process is running. We've got a small implementation of 5S there. So it's not necessarily, hey, I want to go out and train 30 people. I want to be able to pay for the training quickly. I say, well, where are the processes that we can gain the most return on investment, and what kind of training can we train people to do to have that effect, and then to be able to carry that on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are there any like milestones at an organization that are maybe things to think about? Like one that comes to mind for me is if I've got 12 sites, I probably want to have at least one person trained at a greenbelt level per site. And then, maybe if we're a little bit further into the culture, maybe I have some basic level, maybe it's a white belt training or some little module that we've incorporated into our new hire onboarding process with some
Yes.
little bit of training. Is there some guidelines like that you guys might?
We don't believe in big bang implementations. We believe in an implementation that grows, that we start at very small and create the want for us to come somewhere else. Depending on your footprint, usually it's about 8 to 10% green belts. So it could be more based on the complexity of your process and how much problems you have. Okay.
You said
So
8 to 10% of what
uh,
number is that?
green belts, 8 to 10% of your population of green belts.
Is that like eight
So
to 10% of headcount or
yeah,
what?
8 to 10% of the area which you want to implement. So if you're not looking at back office, which I would not suggest. I think back office has a lot of opportunity, actually more than manufacturing. And I'm sorry, I'm keeping this more to manufacturing, but in any company, the 8 to 10% gives you the ability to kind of focus on different sections of the company. White belts should be everybody involved in the implementation. So if your implementation is scaled down, which I would suggest you never want to implement overall, it chokes the organization, and most organizations that do that don't do it for more than about 2 years. And I can give you probably 1,000 of that.
If a company had a lot of plants and they were, is this something that they would do like one plant at a time, or
Yes.
so is that how you would recommend start with
Even
one?
smaller than that. So, uh, uh, to build, okay, I'll give you an example. To build a house, all right. What's the first thing that we need to build a house?
Well, probably some architecture and a lot, and then a hole in the ground and some permits.
Okay, good. That's perfect. All right. So even before you lay a foundation, right, you have to have a plan. You have to plan that house out to the nth degree. So most companies jump into continuous improvement without any kind of plan. They just put the fire hat on and jump into burning building. So in order to really have continuous improvement sustain, we need to understand and plan how are we going to do it. Okay, and my experience has showed me that if we start small, we start at a facility, at a plant, in a department, someplace small, where everybody else can see it and everybody else can experience the wins, they're going to want to have that, right? So if you come and shove things down people's throats, they are going to inherently react the wrong way, right? So that's a lot of what I see is we're going to do it overall. Rarely do I see we want to do a litmus test here and see what I call it the stomach. See if we have the stomach to do this, because continuous improvement is hard. It's like I kind of correlate it to weight loss, right? So everybody wants the weight loss by taking pills or running on a treadmill for a day and then it becoming a coat hanger, right? None of that stuff is going to work. It's not going to have long-term sustainment, right? The only way you're going to sustain weight loss is to change the habits, to change the way you think. And if you don't change the way you think in a company, and you take the shortcuts for implementation of continuous improvement by just hiring a green belt or training a green belt, you may get thin for a couple months, but it's not going to last.
Yeah, I've heard some consultants talk about the importance of starting small to gain support around just the idea of solving the things that bother the average, person on the floor sort of thing. Because if you come in with some big cost reduction headcount trimming project, you're probably not going to make a lot of friends,
That's the
right?
death of any CI.
Yeah.
To have one of your KPIs be the reduction of FTEs, and I see that all the time. And it's advertised to the people out in the facility, and that's a hard thing too. So I like, another thing I see that goes wrong in promoting continuous improvement is, let's just train a bunch of people and have them solve a bunch of problems, right? Just let them find problems. There is a huge problem with that. Okay, so if I'm, Johnny Bag of Donuts, and I'm at this process, and I have this printer that's 30 yards from me, and I have to walk to it 30 times a day, and I'm promoted to, hey, if you see a waste, you fix it, right? So I then bring that closer to me, to where it's right next to me, but now I might be impacting 15 other people.
Yeah.
So those kind of improvements, culture is not what a company's there for. Culture is that's all nice and touchy feely, but a company's there to make money. So we have to understand, how do we prioritize projects so that we can gain the most return on investment, the quickest way possible, with the least resource, and in the same sense, give some things to the people on the floor to help them out, to produce ergonomic workplaces, because all that stuff's going to happen anyways, right? And it's
Absolutely.
funny when I tell my green belts that you need to have the trust of the people on the floor, because they're the ones with the knowledge and the power. So if you have to put the improvements in place that really don't have any effect to monetary effect, but it's going to help them, so give it to them.
Absolutely. Kevin, I have a feeling we could probably talk for hours about this,
Sure, sure.
and we probably ought to just have you come back and do another little
Yeah.
for anybody that's looking at outsourcing, hiring some training. Is there something unique or different about your organization versus some others that somebody might choose?
Yeah, our goal is to get you passed through the process, to get you through the DMAIC process, and we don't shortcut it. Our class is hard. Our class is difficult. It's a lot different than other classes, which are really out there to, I won't say to gain money, but to uh, not focus on teaching you. Our course is really, we have 5 days in course. We have online courses, we have virtual courses, we have hybrid courses, but our course is only a small part of our training. Before the course, we work with our students to define a problem, to charter a problem, to get data for a problem, so that when in class, the instructor can really focus on their data and get them through the analyze phase. And then we work with this is what sets us apart. We work with our students for up to 6 months after to achieve their certification, and we don't charge anything more for that. And we can do that because we have a very, very defined roadmap. It's the DMAIC roadmap. It's a huge database of different tools in a sequence that our students love, because as we go through this over and over again with companies, they become very familiar with it. They know what the next tool is, and their ability to pass the process increases exponentially. So that's how we really get our return customers. But a lot of customers that come into our process for the first time, they're really kind of overwhelmed with, I have to do stats, I have to do data analysis. But those who make it through the process all tell me the same thing, that, man, it was tough. It was really hard, but I stuck with it, and it makes sense. I now know how to solve a problem with the data.
One of the things that I mentioned is core to our mission and purpose here is this idea of continuous improvement helps companies, but also helps careers. Is there somebody that comes to mind that you can think of that came through your training and it was kind of a stepping stone to something great that they did in their...
We follow students. So I've been teaching for almost 30 years, and I follow students. I link up with all my students on LinkedIn. I get messages from them, from students that I've known for 15 years. I follow their career. They go from, being kind of low on the totem pole to being the very high on the totem pole. So, and that jazzes me. I'm a teacher, a mentor. That's what I do. That's what I love. Owning a company is just kind of icing on the cake, right? So I'd love to watch people go through the process and become very successful. And I tell them in the first day of class, this is a phenomenal methodology. Lean, Six Sigma, all of these they'll make you a powerhouse if you keep doing it. And I will see you propelled to a different level. So, and again, when students leave and go do other stuff, I see that happen.
I see that as well, and I think that's probably one of the great things about this discipline. And I would say even different than something else you could go learn, like project management skills or something. Like there's just something a little different about whether you call it Lean or Six Sigma or continuous improvement or green belt training. There's just some layers of that set of skills that are very beneficial to career advancement and just helping people. And I love it when I hear stories of people who change the way they do things at home in their garage or in their sock drawer based on stuff that they've learned. And and that's I really appreciate your time today. This has been really fantastic. This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire. KPI Fire is continuous improvement software. KPI Fire helps you align strategy, drive execution, and engage people all in one powerful software platform. So whether you're leading a team or transforming an entire organization, KPI Fire is your partner in achieving breakthrough results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com. And thanks so much for joining us today on the podcast. We appreciate your time and your experience. If you would like to suggest a guest, ask a question, or give us any ideas for episodes or content, please reach out to me, Keith Norris, on LinkedIn. You can find me, Keith C., the letter C, Norris, in case there's a couple of Keith Norrises on there. And this concludes our episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us on all the socials and share the podcast with friends or colleagues who are passionate about continuous improvement just like you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change.